something that I have had to put a lot of work into because you don't want your items to die before selling. And any money gonna go to waste, You can find us at Blooming Gifts, that's BLOOMING, Gifts, GIFTSJA on all your social media platforms. So that's Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Blooming Gifts JA. And you can WhatsApp us at 876-460-2405.
Next week, we continue to spotlight entrepreneurs turning small ideas into big dreams. Until then, for Small Biz, Big Dreams, I'm Kevin Black.
Turbulence to future, I'm have to end that CVM. See it happen. We've got the love others are searching for. I'm still loving you, even though you're gone. I could have been one of the most notorious. Keep it royal. Give thanks and praise for life. Thank you very much. Go bang!
Thanks for joining us for CVM News Afternoon. It's Thursday, April 23, 2026. I'm Akeem Oret. Up first this afternoon, following the shooting death of a woman on the grounds of a St. James Church Wednesday afternoon, church leaders are making it clear they will not be intimidated. 38-year-old Cora Thompson was shot and killed at the entrance of the Montego Bay New Testament Church of God while a fasting service was in full swing. Pastor of the church, Bishop Roel Robinson, says despite the deadly attack, the church will continue its mission without fear.
The church, though mourning, is a movement that keeps on fighting. It's a spiritual warfare, and we'll have to encourage each other. We will have to pray for each other. This is not a personal thing. It is a collective experience as a church. So we plan to provide brief counseling to the church members and keep on praying and supporting the family. I'm more so concerned about the family members of our sister right now. And we definitely have to reach out to them and provide any support possible or every support that would help them to cope in a time of tragedy.
In the meantime, President of the Jamaica Evangelic Alliance, Bishop Dr. Alvin Bailey, says the attack reflects a troubling disregard for life and the sanctity of the church.
Sacred grounds and persons who have disregard for the sanctity of human life, for God, for righteousness, who are downright ungodly, will show the same kind of scant regard for the church and for the church environment and even for people who go to church. And so it just reflects, in my estimation, the kind of insensitivity and disregard for life and godliness that is presently taking place in our society.
A Clarendon businessman was shot and injured by unknown assailants inside his business establishment in Berrydale District Wednesday night. 42-year-old David Cohen is said to now be in hospital in serious condition. Reports are that Mr. Cohen was inside his shop when two men drove up, alighted from their vehicle and opened gunfire at the businessman. They fled the scene. No motive has yet been established for the attack. A prosecution witness on Wednesday gave an emotional testimony in the Klansman gang trial about identifying one of the victims in the 2018 Bog Walk St. Catherine shooting. The witness told the court the man, quote, looked like he was sleeping when his body bag was unzipped at a funeral home. Our reporter Carla Ramdeen, who has been tracking this story, now reports.
Another prosecution witness testified on Tuesday in relation to the chain of custody of evidence connected to the Bog Walk St. Catherine incident in April 2018. which resulted in the murder of 2 men and the wounding with intent of another. The men charged in relation to the incident are the accused Tesha Miller and Kirk Forrester. The shooting covers count 9, 10, and 11 in the prosecution's 32-count indictment. Count 9 charges Miller and Forrester with facilitating a criminal organization in February 24, 2018, murder of Leon Burke in St. Catherine. Count 10 relates to the murder of Kemar Williams, and Count 11 facilitating the commission of a serious offense by a criminal organization, the wounding with intent of an unnamed individual. The witness, a detective constable attached to the St. Catherine Scenes of Crime Unit in 2018, testified that on April 24, 2018, he was approached by a detective sergeant to assist in transporting evidence to the Scenes of Crime Unit and the Institute of Forensic Science and Legal Medicine. The evidence consisted of 2 bullets recovered from the 2 bodies during the post-mortem. The witness stated that he was accompanied by a detective sergeant to the lab. He told the court that he handed over the package and received a receipt, which he later logged in the station's exhibit book. During cross-examination, the witness was questioned by defense counsel Denise Hinson, representing the accused Tesha Miller, regarding the recording of his statement outlining his actions that day. Attorney Hinson inquired about the time in which the witness took to record his statement, indicating that the statement was recorded in January 2026, 8 years after. Defense counsel pressed the witness on his ability to record the chain of events after such a long period. The witness explained that he had originally recorded a statement in 2018, but it was misplaced. He was later asked by a detective sergeant to re-record a statement in January 2026. He testified that he was able to recall the chain of events by referring to the lab receipt and the exhibit book. The defense later suggested that his recollection was not only aided by those documents, but also by other officers. The witness disagreed. The men are indicted under the Criminal Justice Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act. Carla Ramdeen, CVM News.
There is increased focus on Jamaica's Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act following a carnival after-party shooting that left 3 people wounded and 2 men before the courts. Attorney-at-law Alexander Shaw says the law's strict mandatory minimums are reshaping how both licensed gun holders and accused persons are treated.
You find that even if you are using the firearm and the argument that a firearm holder, a licensed firearm holder may use is that I was acting in self-defense, but you still have to go to court for the prosecution to prove its case and for you to be able to, put forth a defense. And so that time that you have to spend to go through all that process and have to find legal fees to defend your reputation is very troubling.
The National Security Minister has again launched a defense for the police amid constant criticism from some civil society groups in recent times pertaining to the police's use of force and conduct when interacting with civilians. The minister in his sectoral address insists when the narrative seemingly encourages the undermining and disregard of law enforcement, the implications for the security forces in society increase exponentially. He also questions the pushback contending the police are facing combat while many simply criticize.
Sometimes all these people calling on the police to always have cameras should go out there and go to Twickenham Park and let the JD fire some rounds on them head, them hear what an M16 buzzing on them head is like. Policemen know that, they face that, they can't be made into targets.
Dr. Chang says he will not apologize for the police applying pressure on criminals despite the critics.
If we charge the police in particular in a high violent society, President went to 60 per 100,000, The United Nations defined what? 36 as civil strife. Went as far as 60. If we support cause that make the police look like they are acting criminally in high violence and in difficult areas, it undermines the authority of the police. More critically, and I feel strongly, I said, I didn't lose my temper when I went on radio and I wasn't fully out yet. It hurts me personally, very strongly about it. We must allow the criminal justice system and the oversight body to work. You put policemen at risk.
The driver of a panel van says he's lucky to be alive this afternoon after the vehicle he was driving was hit by a speeding ambulance in St. James Tuesday. It's understood that the van driver was heading to Freeport in Montego Bay from the Bogue end of Alice Eldemar Drive. On approaching the traffic lights at the Freeport Police Station intersection, the driver says he was proceeding through a green light when he noticed an ambulance approaching from the opposite direction. He says he did everything he could to avoid a crash, but the ambulance slammed into the rear of the van, causing it to overturn. A police officer at the scene raised concerns about emergency vehicles disregarding traffic signals, noting that a siren doesn't automatically grant right of way, but is simply a request for motorists to give way. And we take a break here inside CVM News at noon, but stay with us. Our live interview comes up next. Welcome back to CVM News at noon. Civil society leaders are calling for broad and meaningful consultation as Jamaica moves toward introducing a new non-profit organizations NPO Act. Despite improvements under the Charities Act of 2013 and its 2022 regulations, stakeholders say the current system remains burdensome. Sector representatives warn that without structured and inclusive engagement, the law risks undermining the very organizations it seeks to regulate. The legal consultant to the Council of Voluntary Social Services warned that the current regulatory framework continues to impose systemic constraints on the effective functioning of civil society organizations. Here to discuss these issues is Executive Director of the Council of Voluntary Social Services, Nancy Pinhas. Welcome, Mrs. Pinhas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Akeem.
How are the operations of NPOs being affected by the current NPO Act?
This work started in 2024 before the government, as far as we know, conceived of reforming the Charities Act because the increasing regulations due to the FATF and the AML regulations imposed on Jamaica. The sector had been faced with increasing regulations and sort of a protected status had been administered on charities with the good intention of protecting charities from being exposed and used for whether it was money laundering or any of these other risks that we could be associated with. However, what it really created was a situation where you found a number of organizations spent 6 months to a year awaiting renewal of their charity status, which impacts significantly their ability to get funding. Funding is limited as it is. And their ability also to function and operate in a space with a charities regulator that they found were imposing restrictions and regulations that were disproportionate to their individual resources and also the potential risks that many of them face has not really been assessed. However, the regulations are applied. We welcome the government of Jamaica's initiative to revise the act completely. What we're really asking right now is, one, we've done the work. We've had a series of consultations with subsector groups across CSOs, received the feedback. We've done the work with regards to looking at the legislation, the regulations. And also what we determined was there were not just flaws in the application of the regulations and the legislation itself, but that it wasn't underpinned by a policy. There is no solid policy regarding civil society organizations in Jamaica. And this was an important piece. So once the government announced late last year that the act was being created, we saw this as an opportunity to make recommendations, to have a seat at the table. It's a significant reform, and we really wanted to ensure that civil society, about whom the reform is, has a seat at the table. You know, we want to ensure that a framework of legislation, regulations is designed so it's risk-based,
but
it's proportionate.
Yes,
and
but
enabling.
Mrs. Pinas, why was the dual registration system for NPOs necessary before, and what makes it obsolete?
This was not disclosed to us. We have very little details. We have not seen a draft. We're not quite sure if the structure remains the same, where there's a dual registration system, which is what prevails now. You have to register with the Companies Office as a company not limited by guarantee. And then thereafter, you make application to the Charities Department, the Department of Friendly and Cooperative Societies. To be honest, this is what we're asking. We are asking to have a clear understanding, have a seat at the table, and an early stage seat at the table, not just a check a box that we've told CSOs that the act is being revised. We want to be a part of it. It is about us, so not without us.
So what was uncovered from the comparative policy analysis referencing practices of other countries?
I don't have a comparative. What we've done is we looked at the old legislation, the Charities Act of 2013 and the subsequent regulations, and we'd made a number of recommendations. And we had a consultation with the permanent secretary, and we submitted these, all the analysis that was undertaken and the recommendations by the consultant that CVSS had in fact engaged under a previous project that we were undertaking with the European Union as actors of civil society and development. So we'd had the opportunity, we'd had the resources, we'd done the work, and then coincidentally the act changed. So we don't have the current draft or even structure of the new revised NPO Act. And this is where we're concerned. We're now in April. Apparently this act is going to be promulgated in October. So time is of the essence, and we feel as though we have a lot to offer. We're a very important sector. That is not in dispute, I don't think, at any table. We need to be a part of the discussion and the development and the reform of this act.
So what then are the main recommendations being made by the CVSS for the act?
Right. So, you know, some of the recommendations have come from the consultations with the CSOs themselves, and it's wide ranging. They're different sizes. They're operating in different sectors. So a couple of the pieces are to do with things like service, which doesn't have to do with legislation, but service orientation, customer service standards, help desk. Part of what was determined was that the regulations particularly were not proportionate and they were not risk-based. So what we're proposing is that there's a stratification, which happens in a number of countries, Commonwealth countries, Canada, New Zealand, we've had a quick look at, where they distinguish between smaller community-based organizations and large resource-rich foundations. So different standards are applied in terms of audited accounts, in terms of submissions, etc. Also a risk assessment framework. So what we're asking is that you prioritize this heavy oversight and heavy burden of reporting for the higher risk or high turnover charities while easing the burden on smaller ones. And proportional sanctions. Right now the sanctions are not particularly onerous, except that once they determine that you're in what they call a high-risk protected status, is that there's an increased oversight by the Department of Charities, which again is really, the intention is good. It's meant to protect the charity, to ensure that what they perceive of as a risk is managed. But the real reality is that the department doesn't really have the facility or the resources to manage as far as I know, it is over 40 charities have been placed in this status. and it impacts the charity's ability to function.
So, Mrs. Pinhas, a unified regulatory framework sounds ideal in theory. What are the red flags CVSS is looking for in the draft legislation to ensure this doesn't just create a new, more powerful bureaucracy?
So again, what we're asking is, we understand clearly that Jamaica, because of its, we're less high risk under the FATF regulations, but FATF under recommendation 8 actually does foresee that there should have been consultation with the entity and the organizations that you are imposing any additional regulations or constraints on. That has never happened. The 2022 regulations, as far as I know, were imposed without any consultations. So it's very important that we avoid these